Yes, there are different funds that are mentioned in the Baha'i religious writings. And the one that you're talking about is the Hoquq, or the right of God. And there's another one called zakat, which is the purification of wealth. And these are alms for the poor. And these monetary funds have been around and explained in the previous dispensations also. In the dispensation of Judaism, they had zakat, which is almsgiving. Jesus talks about zakat in the New Testament. He says when we give alms, we should give this in secret. And in Islam, they also have the concept of zakat. And zakat is 1/40 of a person's income. So if they work 40 hours a week, the zakat for that week would be 1 hour's worth of their work. And this is to be given to the fund. It's a 40th, and it represents the main fund that is used to take care of the social needs of the people. And it's meant to be spent upon the social institutions that are the auxiliary institutions for the Mashriq al-Azkar. Now, also, the exilarchs, the exiled monarchs of King David, or the Davidic kings in the time of Judaism, they had this fund also that you mentioned that was a 20th. And then the imams had the similar fund called khums. And this is continued as Hoquq Allah, which is brought down from 20% to 19%. And in the will and testament of Abdulbaha, this law of Hoquq is mentioned in the Octus of Bahaullah and several other places. It says that this fund is to be offered through the guardian of the cause of God, who is the irremovable member and president of the Universal House of Justice. So there's no such thing as a Universal House of Justice without the descendant of King David, who's the executive branch of this. And the Hoquq is the fund that is what is used by the executive branch to carry out its function in educating the people and diffusing the divine fragrances. This is one of the things that was usurped back in 1960 when Ru'i Khanum and the Hands rejected Abdul-Baha's son, Mason Rimi Agsan, and they separated themselves from the Universal House of Justice, which was set up as the first International Baha'i Council on January 9th of 1951. Now, even though we have reestablished all of this, during Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha's ministries during their lifetime, at different times they forbid the people to contribute to the Hoquq, that this is up to the executive branch when the people are allowed to participate in the Hoquq or not. And it's a benefit unto them the same way zakat is a benefit unto the people. For instance, the rabbis have explained that if they don't perform zakat directly to the religious institutions itself, they could donate an hour of labor at a soup kitchen or give money to another cause that they're in support of. But it's absolutely essential, if people are making a living and a livelihood, that they donate a 40th of their time to some humanitarian effort. Or whether it's with their labor or their time that they donate or money, it doesn't matter. They have to do some humanitarian work, at least a 40th amount of what their regular labor is, to be altruistic and support the humanitarian pursuits to include themselves in the oneness of humanity. Now, we have not allowed people to contribute to the Hoquq, because we're in a violation of the covenant situation. And this violation of the covenant has continued since the year 2001, when the 9/11 has happened. We've been sued in court over and over and over again. We're being sued right now in the 10th Circuit in the United States. Before that, it was the 7th Circuit of the United States. And then it was also in Montana State and local court. And it was also at the United Nations at the World Intellectual Property Organization in Switzerland. So we don't participate in the collection of any funds at this current time, nor have we over the last 2 decades or more. The Baha'is themselves, if they have a local group or a national group, will raise up a fund themselves to promote the Baha'i teaching effort. And this is important because Paul said the same thing in the New Testament. He said he had every right, which is what Hoquq means, to tithe, which is a tenth, the people that he was working with, but he was a tent manufacturer and he had his own business. And he said that even though he had every right to do it, he didn't collect any funds during that part of his ministry, to make the point that he would make these tents himself to make his own money, to show that he wasn't in it for the money. This is why we've had this position over the last 20 years, that we are only interested in getting the truth of the Baha'i Covenant's message out there, that the descendant of King David, whoever that is in our day and generation, must be the president of Baha'u'llah's Universal House of Justice, so we can recognize the true Universal House of Justice from fakes, frauds, and imitations. And we've decided to follow in the footsteps of Paul, the way it says Peter followed in Paul's footsteps, to make this point really clear. And the message the Baha'i faith has for the people of the world is that Baha'u'llah has offered us a peace plan for an election of the Council of the Nations. And this is a good idea. And everybody can see that it's something that's definitely necessary. And the United Nations is failing, or failed, the same way as the League of Nations and the World Court before. We need to have international cooperation to elect the Supreme Tribunal. And the prophecies in the Quran and in the Holy Bible for Jews and Christians indicate that it'll be a descendant of King David who's prophesied to come, who will reveal the blueprints from God about how humanity can work together to cooperate to elect a supreme tribunal to bring peace to the world, a council of the nations, and a universal collective security agreement. And Baha'u'llah and Abdulbaha fulfilled these prophecies for the coming of these Davidic kings that would bring this plan. And this fulfills the religions of the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims. So what we're seeing here is the Sans Guardian Baha'is and the clergy and the other religions are preventing or oppositional to explaining to the rest of the people of the world that in fact God has given us this plan. It originates from God, and we're free to worship God in our own way, the way we understand that. But the practical part of this worship of God means electing the Supreme Tribunal that'll bring peace to the world. So we're trying to get the message out there right now, despite the fact that there's a lot of folks in opposition to this and clergy positions in the different religions, and that we're being sued by Haifa and Wilmette, Illinois, the National Spiritual Assembly out of the Chicago area. And this is leading more and more into these calamities and catastrophes. No amount of money is going to purchase us out of the Holocaust, of the thermonuclear war that we're marching toward. We only a spiritual revolution of the people, of their inner spirit, to realize that what's most important is that we're all human beings and we're all equally as such created by the same source of the cause of causes. And we should be mature enough in our days today to be able to elect a council of the nations to prevent war. And all of these other money-making schemes and organized religions and things like this are for the self-aggrandizement and empowerment of certain egos that want to be in leadership positions. The Baha'i faith and the Baha'is under the provisions of the covenant have a recommendation for the people who are in the leadership positions in the world and in government. We have no interest in ourselves being in leadership positions in the governments of the world. That's not our job. That's not what I do personally. I'm a teacher and an educator. We give guidance to the people. By remaining firm in the covenant, we have held fast and firm through 5 Baha'i generations. Baha'u'llah, Abdulbaha's son, his grandson, and today's great-grandson, to preserve the international Baha'i peace program in its pristine form, to offer this as a gift to the people of the world in each day and generation in which they live, so they can resolve their differences and eventually set up a council of the Supreme Tribunal where they will learn war no more. And we've continued to give this guidance without interruption for the last 100 years, from 1921 all the way till 2022, which is this year now, and we're moving forward on this. We're working diligently day and night right now to promulgate the awareness that all the people of the world have entered into a covenant in 1928, the International Covenant of Peace, that outlaws war. And all the people of the world need to rededicate themselves to this covenant and to find a way to implement a system that will enforce the International Covenant of Peace. So war will be eliminated and the threat of thermonuclear war will be a thing of the past. And this is what we're working toward today. The World Court, the League of Nations, again, and the UN failed to uphold the International Covenant of Peace in 1928. They've all failed to do this. We have to come together, and the prophecies indicate Russia, the United States, England, and France would be the first four chartered countries to do this as Christian superpowers, to recognize that this is our opportunity now at the prophesied time to form a correct international government. And our role as Bahais is that the people in government are going to stay in those leadership positions. We have no interest in leadership positions like this in the least. In the Baha'i faith, all of us are equal in our Baha'i community. Abdulbaha said we were all to be equal with him. And we are, we're all equal human beings. And in our practice of Tawheed, we make no distinction. But in our positions in society and in our professions, we have different gifts and talents, and we have compersion. We rejoice in the victory of our fellow believers. And if our fellow believers suffer, we suffer with them. We're joined together. We're connected. As the fortunes of the faith go up, the fortunes of all the people go up. And as the fortunes of the faith decline, the fortunes of the people decline. And this vicissitude of the fortunes expanding and contracting has to do with our growth and spiritual development, because each day we move closer to the door of death, which is the exit door from this material plane of existence, where we're tested and challenged and tempted to see if we're going to do the right thing and say no to the things we should personally say no to, and say yes to the things that we know are from God that would tend to elevate our station. The obsession and concern over the management and control over material goods and services and material things is a sickness. It's a sickness. The people are obsessed with amassing material things for themselves, or looking at a map and saying, we control this territory and stuff like this. That's not what this is. The nation states of the world and all the borders are man-made and artificial. There's no boundaries on the surface of the earth. It's a globe. People are free to walk wherever they want and live wherever they want. Well, armies set up governments, and then they define territories, and they have borders. All these are, if you think about it, are administrative districts in which you can help take care of the needs of the people in those regions. And it makes sense to have an administrative district to facilitate things. Like if roads need repaired, the maintenance of forests and rivers, making sure that things are not polluted and that the environment's not ruined, helping commerce and trade and communication happen. We need an administration of human affairs. And that's all this is. The idea that the people who are in the administration of human affairs, locally, nationally, or internationally, are some sort of superior type of person to your average farmer or school teacher or doctor or scientist is ridiculous. This is just another job and a position that people have in society. This mentality of empire building and thinking that people control physical resources like water and coal and energy, and therefore they can manipulate and control the thinking of people through the clergy class and stuff like this. It's just a shameful, ridiculous waste of time and a poor game at best. Even if somebody hoarded all the material things of this world, in 200 years, they'll be dead and they'll be in the next life and they'll have nothing. So the reason that we're on earth to grow and evolve spiritually is, and to learn lessons. One of the things that we would do if we were mature enough is manage our material affairs globally, cooperatively, so everybody, every man, woman, and child on the planet has a fair shake to live their life freely as a human being and not have to worry about war and crime and poverty and disease and famine. That's the things governments are there for, to prevent those things from happening and to facilitate the more quickening of human communication and human growth and evolution for human society. So until people are educated to become spiritual, they're going to continue to wallow in the mire of not understanding the difference between material civilization and spiritual civilization. And the revelation of Baha'u'llah and all the manifestations of God is the source of spiritual civilization in the world. And the Bahais that hold to the covenant give this gift of spiritual civilization to the people of the world so they can improve their material civilization. We have no desire whatsoever in any way at all to take over the material civilizations of the different peoples and cultures. And if the people claim to be Baha'is, yet they're behaving that way, then they're not Baha'is. If a lamp is on, it's on. If the lamp is off, it's off. Saying it's on when it's off is obviously not true. What we mean by Baha'i is a person with the light bulb on, regardless of whether they heard the word Baha'i or not. And this is the majority of people in the world today fulfill the criteria of what it means to be Baha'i, which is they love all the world and they're here to serve humanity. Now, some of the people in the way that they're serving humanity are confused. And war, bellicose, and in German, where or war comes from the root word confusion. So when people are confused, as we've been talking at our Baha'i meetings, and they'll make a decision in confusion, will be a confused decision. And so these leaders that are in charge of the governments and affairs of the world don't know how to bring about the equilibrium that needs to take place to elect a council of the nations that'll function and work correctly, unlike the United Nations that doesn't function or work correctly. And this is where we come in with our guidance. Instead, Joe Biden is listening to Pope Francis. Vladimir Putin has Bishop or Patriarch Kirill, and these are Christian leaders and ministers. And the Pope, Francis, and Kirill have a unity in Christ. And Christ promised Christ promised kingdom that would appear at this prophesied time in the world. And we can show the religious leaders that Baha'u'llah fulfills this, and the Pope, Francis, and Kirill, and the other ones should be able to tell Biden and Putin, yes, this is the plan that God has for us to elect a council of the nations democratically that's fair. And if Russia and the United States and France and England participate in this, it will bring peace on earth through justice to all the other nations of the world. And this is a gift from Baha'u'llah to the people. You don't have to convert to Judaism or the Baha'i faith to accept Albert Einstein's formula, E equals MC squared. If a person's into physics, they just accept it and they use it in their physics work, whether their background religiously is Jewish or Baha'i. Einstein went through the Baha'i firesides also, or whether they're Hindu or Native American or Buddhist or something else. E equals MC squared works in physics. It's a gift for physicists. Happens to come from somebody who's of Jewish ancestry and who went through the Baha'i firesides and was inspired in this way. But we don't have to convert to Judaism or the Baha'i faith to use this formula in building atomic weapons and making nuclear power plants that could produce green, clean energy if they were recycler reactors and not plutonium breeders. We just use the formula. We don't have to convert to the Baha'i faith or become accepting of Shia Islam, which is the Bab of Baha'u'llah's background, or become Jewish, which is Baha'u'llah's ancestry, or become Christian as he fulfills prophecy for the second coming of Christ, to accept his peace plan. It was prophesied that a man of Jewish descent who would inherit the throne of David would reveal a plan for world peace, and that the people could accept this unalloyed. And this is who Baha'u'llah is. But we're not plagiarists. E equals MC squared comes from Einstein. So this plan for world peace comes from Baha'u'llah. This is the person who did this. When we go to the United Nations building, we'll wrap this up right now, there's a big wall there called the Isaiah Stone, and it quotes the book of Isaiah. And it says in front of the United Nations in Manhattan in New York City, in big letters, about a foot and a half tall each, says, they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war no more. Prior to the coming of Baha'u'llah, this prophecy in Isaiah chapter 2, where it says the nations shall flow to the mountain of the house of the Lord, was interpreted by the rabbis as the rebuilding of the Ezekiel's temple, the millennial temple prophesied of in the Bible. So the Jews in Israel have all the stones for the temple cut and ready to go, and they're ready to rebuild what they think is the house of the Lord on Temple Mount out of stones. This is the rabbi's interpretation. This was their interpretation for thousands of years, all the way up until today even. Jesus Christ, when he comes, teaches, as Paul and Peter have explained, that the believers, the body of believers, the human beings, all of us are living stones in the temple. It's Baha'u'llah who explained that the temple is the International League of the Council of Nations, the Supreme Tribunal. That building the temple doesn't mean building a temple of stone on Temple Mount and all the people are going to flow there and learn rabbinical Judaism according to their interpretation. No. Now, whether they build their temple or not, it's another freedom of religion issue. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not for or against it. I have no opinion right now. But what the meaning of this is that we're all stones in the living temple, building the temple, which they believe is supposed to happen 490 years from 1535, which is coming up in 2025, is that we elect through the building the temple of the Supreme Tribunal by electing the membership that represents ourselves and our nations. That's what building the temple means. When Baha'u'llah revealed this, that the house of the Lord was the Supreme Tribunal, then after this, in imitation of his plan, they put the prophecy of Isaiah in front of the United Nations. Nobody realized that the house of the Lord, that all the nations were to flow to, would be electing a council of the nations until Baha'u'llah revealed it. And he's descended from King David, and he's seated upon David's throne, and he's prophesied by his prophesied name, his prophesied date, his prophesied address. He'd be in Israel in the Holy Land of Mount Carmel and in Hoquq, and his prophesied mission, which is this blueprint for the house of the Lord. This is a gift from God to all the people, and they can elect this house of the Lord, this supreme tribunal, and they don't have to change their religious belief or their culture or their language or get baptized or circumcised or join another weird foreign religion that they don't understand. Baha'u'llah tells them if they go back to the roots of their own indigenous religion, they'll find the prophecy in Judaism, Christianity, Islam especially, for electing this house of the Lord. The Native Americans have this. It's called the World Hoop of the Nations that Black Elk saw in Wavoka, that would assemble around the world tree, which is the tree of the covenant. All of the religions have this world tree in it. All of the world religions prophesy the golden age of humanity. All of the different teachings and traditions speak of a day when all of the people of the world will assemble together and about what they differ and to settle their differences peacefully and no longer have fighting. So to conclude by saying that no amount of money is going to purchase peace on earth or justice for all. What's going to happen is that we have to have what Baha'u'llah calls the most great justice. And he says in the hidden words that justice means seeing the truth with your own eyes and not through the eyes of your neighbor. So therefore, justice is founded upon the education of people seeing the reality of this. And because of the violation of the Baha'i Covenant in 1960, the IMF, the World Bank, and the United Nations system has been misguided by not receiving correct guidance, that they went along with the violation of the hands and what happened in the state of Israel with the dismantling of the Universal House of Justice that was set up as the first International Baha'i Council on January 9th in 1951. So because of this, the state of Israel and its leadership was misguided. The people at the United Nations were misled. It says in the Will and Testament that they're supposed to turn to Showqi Effendi after abdulbaha, the center of the cause of God. This is the last verse of the Will and Testament. And after him to the Universal House of Justice, and he who turns to whatever else will indeed be in grievous error. So when they turn to Ruia Kanum in the hands, instead of Mason Remy activating that first International Baha'i Council and them having a meeting of the Universal House of Justice, the hands met and Mason wasn't able to call the meeting to order. And the Baha'is of the world were led into grievous error. And when they did this, they led the United Nations and the state of Israel into grievous error. The relationships between, for instance, the nation of Iran and the state of Israel during the lifetime of Showqi Effendi were not the way they are today. That by doing all of these things that Ruia Kanum and the hands did, the tensions between all of the contrasting cultures and diverse peoples and styles, which are meant to be our strength, our unity and diversity. Instead, when the hands broke the covenant, they did this from the insistent self and spread conformity. And conformity is the enemy of diversity. They want everything uniform, whereas diversity is not the enemy of unity. Unity and conformity are not the same thing. When we're united in the Spirit of God, we have diversity in our behavior and our personal characteristics and our personal practices. True divine unity, Tawheed, is the breeding ground of radical pluralism of diversity. And when we say diversity, we mean unity and diversity. But what they have is conformity. And by doing this, this antagonized Israel and Iran. This made the situation with the Palestinian people worse. And I've already talked about how the name Palestine is a pejorative word from the Philistines in the Bible that has to do with Greek imperialists that came and tried to take over and have colonies in the Levant. Now, the people who are known as Palestinians are the ancestral descendants of the people who lived in the Holy Land. So I don't know why they picked calling themselves Palestinians when they could call themselves the people of the Holy Land, which might be like Kudsis or something like this, would much be better. They're the holy people. When Syria conquered the 10 northern tribes of Israel and took them into captivity, the 10 lost tribes of the Jews, or Israel rather, was lost to assimilation. They intermarried and converted to Zoroastrianism and Islam down throughout the ages. And then they moved back to the Holy Land. So these people that are there are the descendants, as far as I'm concerned, of the 10 lost tribes, as much as most of the other people throughout the entire Middle East that they married into. So there's no reason for the people to be fighting. God sent them the religion of Islam so that they would accept the covenant of Abraham that provides for a descendant of King David, who is prophesied to come, who will announce the election again of the Supreme Tribunal that will bring peace to the world. So no amount of money is going to purchase this justice and peace. The people have to get educated to these things and investigate the facts and get deeper and deeper and deeper into this. You know, using different names for the people, they create antagonization. For instance, a Christian living in the United States who believes in Moses and Israel and the Jewish faith and Jesus Christ, when they hear that there's Palestinians, they just think these are the Philistines from the Bible who are the enemies of God according to the Bible. And they're not. They're not related to the Philistines. They have nothing to do with the Philistines. They're not Greeks. They're not a Western imperial power from Greece settling in the area they're calling Palestine now. You know, that's just not true. They're the indigenous, original, spiritual people that have always lived there, who were had to deal with the actual Philistines that were a problem way back in the day. When the Assyrians wiped everything out, they got rid of the Philistines and they captured the 10 northern tribes, and they were lost to assimilation. All the descendants of the people in Iraq and Iran, all the way up to India and up into Turkey, this is where these tribes were dispersed, and they intermarried with all the different peoples. So physiologically, we're all descended from Adam. And we're all, according to the Bible, have descents from Abraham and King David. And spiritually, our souls have the same origin. So we should be mature enough today to accept the concept of the oneness of humanity, and that all people are equal in the creation of God. And if we're mature enough, we should be able to manage our global affairs without religious prejudices, national prejudices, racial and ethnic prejudices, and other prejudices that are preventing us from coming together. In other words, we could come together and elect the Supreme Tribunal correctly. Why haven't we? Well, the Jews, Muslims, and Christians are having trouble cooperating. So why? Because of religious prejudice. Well, remove the prejudice so they can cooperate. Why can't we elect a Supreme Tribunal? Well, the Russians are, nationalists for Russians. The Americans are patriots for America. And then the French are French, and the British are Brits. And this is a problem. This is a nationalism and patriotism as such a prejudice that we wouldn't work with somebody because they're of another nation or another patriotism. Therefore, that prejudice needs to go. And similar with our cultural differences. They don't want to work with the North Koreans because they have a different culture. Well, that's wrong. They deserve their own culture. So these differences are our strength. There are diversity. We don't want conformity. And most of the cultures in the East, as well as most of Europe that has its own culture, doesn't like the Mickey Mouse American commercialization and commodification of everything. That it takes away from the true depth of what it means to be a real human being with a deep interior, rich, thick, spiritual life, like the history of English literature in Britain, or the history of French thought that goes back hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 years, or the Russian culture and its poetry and its literature and its art forms and its diversity even within its own country, and so forth and so on. That we don't want, just McDonald's and Walmart and things that have no morals and no ethics and no spiritual value. That's like eating food, which is fast food with empty calories, that doesn't actually satisfy the needs of the body. This is another problem in the cultural wars. Nevertheless, if Americans can do whatever they want in their own borders, but people don't want the whole world to turn into the United States, because what will happen to the culture of Italy? What will happen to the culture of the 56 Asian ethnic groups? What will happen to the culture of North Korea? What will happen to the ancient culture of the Hebrews in Israel? What will happen to the ancient Egyptian culture? What will happen to the culture in Iran? What will happen to the culture in Turkey of the Ottomans and so forth and their heritage? If you see what I'm getting at here, this is what they're resistant to. The only way to prevent these things from happening is to elect the Supreme Tribunal, which will have a representation of the people of all the nations of the world to preserve unity and diversity, to preserve their diversity and difference. And no amount of money is going to bring this about, so we're not interested in the funds for this. We have enough support now to, put together these type of educational things for almost free of price. And we give the waters of life away free of price with unalloyed. And this is the medicine for the sick world. Electing the Supreme Tribunal will resolve all of these problems. But the impediments that are preventing us from doing it have to be removed. And the bottom line is we're human beings that deserve to live as real human beings on the planet in a mature spiritual way. And by spiritual, I mean cooperating, being educated, developing our interior world, our inner life, our inner skills, our understanding, philosophy, art, skills in cooking, and things like this is how we express our inner spirituality through serving, other people. So basically, the first thing is to get the people's attention and to reorientate them as to why we're on earth in the first place. They need to give up the natural attitude of the animal condition we're in and adopt what Paul calls the spiritual attitude, or the Bahai attitude. And that's an attitude of understanding that we're essentially spiritual beings that have to have our spiritual needs met first, and then have our material civilization be the outward expression of our inner spiritual reality. That our spiritual civilization expresses itself in the way that we organize and develop and form our material civilization, which is all inclusive. So when the covenant was broken in 1960 and Maria Khnum and the Hands misled the Baha'i people and the United Nations and the state of Israel and Iran, we've gotten to the pitch that we're in now. By simply hearing the truth of what this is about, with the education that we have, the nations and the world leaders will figure out, once they recognize this guidance, how they can implement it. Or if they want to take the guidance one way or understand it differently, that's up to them. We have a total non-interference policy when it comes to how the countries and governments conduct their affairs. We only have guidance and suggestions that are from the revelation of Baha'u'llah that we believe will help better the people's life here on earth while we're transitioning from this world of opposites into our eternal life and winning our spiritual stations, which is the perfection of our own selves.